There's a new kind of politician roaming the halls of power in Washington.
Do not believe that we cannot make health care a right for all people.
Talking about the kinds of things that aren't normally part of the discussion in American politics.
We do not shy away from bold conversations of health care, housing, and education as human rights.
Meet the self-proclaimed democratic socialists, politicians who argue capitalism isn't working for everyone. They want a stronger social safety net, higher minimum wages, paid parental leave, health care, stronger environmental protections, less wage inequality, and free or affordable higher education. Now, those things don't sound so unusual if you live in a place like Canada or Sweden, the UK, or Denmark, but they're ideas that are pretty radical here in America, a country where universal health care isn't even universally accepted by Democrats, the more liberal of the country's two political parties.
Medicare for all may sound good, but it's actually not good policy, nor is it good politics. I'm telling you.
But democratic socialists in particular face an uphill battle in the U.S. They're trying to sell their message in a place where socialism is, to put it mildly, a dirty word.
America will never be a socialist country.
In fact, just 39% of Americans have a positive reaction to the word socialism. That number falls to just 27% for those aged 65 and up.
Americans have no idea what socialism is. My guess is 2 or 3% could define socialism correctly.
Because paranoia about socialism was ingrained in American politics after World War II.
What's the difference between communism and socialism?
At the height of the Cold War, up against the Soviets, socialism became a thing to be feared.
You will find out that socialism is not a softer substitute or possible prevention for communism, but may lead to it.
A thing to fight against. The Soviet model involved the government owning the means of production and distribution under authoritarian rule. Call it communism or socialism, the U.S. believed one would eventually lead to the other.
See the USA.
America, meanwhile, was a thriving capitalist democracy, about as opposite as you could get. Along the way, Americans became worried that clash of values would eventually lead to nuclear war and the end of the American dream. And so the hunt to root out socialist and communist sympathizers took root at home, and socialist ideals, even within the democratic system, were effectively ruled out.
The main enemy of the United States in the Cold War, of course, was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. And for most Americans, socialism meant communism. It meant tyranny, it meant prison camps, it meant cracking down on free speech, it meant a country which wanted to destroy or could have destroyed the United States with its nuclear weapons. So, not surprisingly, if that's what socialism meant, Americans didn't want any part of it.
Today, socialism is still associated with turmoil and dictatorships in countries like Venezuela or Cuba, where the government has nationalized industries and where democracy doesn't function. But what America's democratic socialists want is something completely different. They still believe in democracy. They don't think the government should be in the business of running businesses, and they don't think socialism should be forced on anybody.
The European term for it, which is actually more accurate, is social democracy. The new Democrats in Canada would be very happy to, I think, be associated with Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and most of the people who are members of the largest socialist organization in America now, the Democratic Socialists of America.
Part of the problem is that American voters don't really have the political vocabulary to discuss democratic socialism. It's a two-party system. You're either a Democrat or a Republican. Anyone to the left of mainstream Democrats is simply called a socialist, even if they're proposing the kinds of things that are common in many healthy democracies around the world.
Any candidate who wants to win outside of a state like California or Massachusetts has to be careful not to get branded as a socialist. Because if you are, you're going to have a tough time winning. There's a reason why President Trump and others on the right constantly try to apply the label socialist to anyone in the Democratic Party.
The most famous democratic socialist in America today is probably Bernie Sanders.
What does freedom mean?
He actually traveled to Canada to see for himself how universal health care works.
Thank you.
Sanders was a serious contender for the 2016 Democratic presidential nomination, and he's trying again in the 2020 campaign. Even he admits he has to do a better job of addressing misconceptions about socialism.
Bernie Sanders does not want to have the United States become the horrific economic situation that unfortunately exists in Venezuela right now. What Bernie Sanders wants is to learn from countries around the world.
The other big name on the far left is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The first-term congresswoman from New York has become something of a household name, not just for taking on the establishment, but for advocating some serious economic reforms. All of this is to say that ideas that once seemed pretty far-fetched might actually have a shot in 21st century America, even though the majority of Americans still have that negative view of socialism. Half of young Americans, millennials born between 1981 and 1996, want to live in a socialist country. 73% think the government should provide universal health care. 67% think the government should pay for college tuition. And here's the kicker. In the 2020 election, those left-leaning millennials will make up 37% of the American electorate.
With economic inequality and a lot of unhappiness about the rich getting richer and richer and working people not getting very far ahead, if far ahead at all, when people talk about socialism now, it often means, I think, to many Americans, a better deal, a fairer shake for ordinary people.
In other words, ideas that were once considered super radical are quickly becoming part of the mainstream. Now there's a whole crop of voters who won't be satisfied unless and until democratic socialist ideas are discussed as part of the political conversation.